Within the black mist that was you-know-who, the 2 points of crimson light that passed for eyes narrowed. The intensity of that gaze deepened until it felt like a physical weight. "Warm-up's over, Potter. Now let's have some fun." The voice was hoarse and laced with cold amusement. Before Harry registered the words, his feet snagged as if on an invisible trap. An imperceptible tripping jinx threw him off balance. Before he could gasp, his body floated upward, limbs flailing like a puppet on strings, helpless and ridiculous. A sluggish chill spread through him, as if the air itself had turned to slow, clinging tar, each movement suddenly arduous. The black mist reshaped itself into several nimble tentacles, striking from unpredictable angles with a hint of mockery. Harry twisted in midair and tried to shout, "Protego!" A faint shield flickered into being and was struck at its weakest point by a precisely aimed blasting curse. The shield shattered before he could do anything. "Too slow, Potter. Your reactions, your magic flow, they're all too slow." You-know-whose voice crawled over him like rot, each word eating away at his composure. "Your spells leak like a torn satchel. No structure." Harry gritted his teeth against the humiliation and steadied himself as best he could. He tried to counterattack, but the opponent's magic was relentless, never pausing. A dancing jinx hit him, and his legs began an involuntary, ridiculous tap dance in midair. You-know-who laughed, a cold, mocking sound that bounced off the stone and cut far deeper than any curse. As Harry gathered energy for chain lightning, a vicious tickling charm made him cough and snort, the arcane power he'd summoned scattering uselessly. The spell was gone. Another cutting curse shredded a new tear in his already battered school robe. Pain flared through him. He was bruised and scorched, hair plastered to his forehead with sweat and dust, robes torn and smudged, wand nearly slipping from his grasp after a particularly brutal blow. Humiliation and anger churned in his chest like a trapped animal. He remembered the petty cruelties of Privet Drive and Malfoy's sneers, but never had he felt so utterly helpless, like he was being picked apart rather than fighting. "Is that all you've got? These little tricks?" Harry forced out a raw, bestial roar, sweat stinging his eyes. Anger flared, hot as incendio, but inside that flame something steadied, a stubborn, narrowing focus. He stopped relying on the flashy arcane flourishes that had been useless against this opponent and went for the basics, the spells he could cast fastest. Expelliarmus! A bolt of red shot out. Stupefy! The quick, blunt spells, though still often dodged or dispersed by the black mist, came in rapid succession, and their speed made you-know-who pause, if only a fraction. "Oh? Finally using your head?" the thing said, a curious surprise threading the mocking tone. A faint satisfaction gleamed in those red eyes. "Still green, Potter? Do you think magic's essence is just pronouncing a name and expecting it to work?" His question landed like a key in Harry's confusion, turning tumblers of memory. Jason's lessons, those dry lectures about arcane theory, channeling mental power, the unity behind different magics, unraveled and reknit themselves in Harry's mind. Mental power directs elemental particles. The quality, the flow of magic, everything obeys rules, and arcane is the language to read them. Those phrases, repeated in failure and pain as you-know-whose spells hammered him, began to crystallize. Harry stopped trying to force spells as if they were machine parts and instead tried to feel the restless particles in the air, nudging them with his will. It was clumsy at first, mostly failures that invited harsher punishment, but the fog of panic thinned. His gaze sharpened into a nearly obsessive focus. You-know-who noticed. The smile in the crimson lights vanished. "Ordinary lessons aren't enough for you anymore," the voice said, losing its playfulness and dropping into something far colder. He smelled opportunity. It was time to pull out the true trump card, the real point of this game. The black mist roiled more wildly, those burning eyes flaring with a pressure that chilled the soul. Harry's robe was shredded to tatters, his skin cut and bruised, his breathing ragged as a dying animal's. But something stubborn still glowed in his green eyes, the faint, fragile birth of understanding. "You tolerate pain well, Potter," the voice rumbled from some bottomless place. "Then try this." You-know-who raised a hand of mist, palm up. A new force gathered, colder and more intimate than anything before, an assault not on flesh but on the spirit. "Physical suffering is the prelude, Potter. Listen to your soul scream." He spoke a twisted, ancient syllable Harry had never heard and aimed it at him. Soul stripping. Harry's entire body froze. An irresistible pulling pain struck from the deepest center of his being. It wasn't bone or muscle being attacked, but something more essential, an invisible core. The chamber warped, colors leaching away into gray silhouettes. He watched his own body from the side, still upright, frozen in that horrified pose, as if glass separated his awareness from the shell. He felt himself being tugged outward, slowly and forcibly drawn out of that body, as if from the end of a long, cold rope. Before he finished speaking, his right hand, entirely composed of black mist, turned palm up. The strange power that had been condensing, acting on the soul itself, suddenly accelerated. Dark elements poured into the air, rushing together to form a fist-sized, bottomless sphere of black energy above his hand. It reflected no light, like a miniature black hole, but its surface writhed with countless tiny, distorted specters. Faintly, as if from far away, came the wailing of vengeful spirits, agonized cries that chilled the blood and made the soul tremble. Harry felt his heart seize. A terror deeper and fiercer than any he had known surged through him like an icy tide. He wanted to scream, to flee, to hide at the ends of the earth away from the thing that radiated death and despair. He could not move. Invisible shackles held him fast. His muscles were rigid and useless. The pressure did not just press on his body, it locked onto his mind, snuffing out any thought of resistance. You-know-who Jason watched the fear on Harry's face with cold, crimson eyes, and the corner of his mouth curved with a merciless intent. He raised the hand that cradled the dark sphere and began to chant in a low, ancient, and ominous cadence. Etheric lock, soul's cleft, void's web, severance's order. The syllables were not any spell Harry knew. They were warped and alien, each one scraping at his nerves like an invisible blade. They were fragments, arcane snippets Jason had taken from the Arcane Codex and disguised, sounding to any ear like the vilest of dark arts. As the words fell, the spirits in the sphere screamed louder, and the cold it radiated swelled until the stone chamber felt like an ice cellar. Devour! On the final word, Jason flung his arm forward. The sphere, condensed with concentrated malice, shot toward Harry's immobilized forehead like a meteor trailing a ragged black tail. It moved almost too fast to see. Harry's mind screamed, "No," but no sound came from his mouth. The darkness filled his vision and struck the lightning-shaped scar on his brow. A faint thud, then agony, like molten iron poured into every nerve, like a million needles tearing at the core of him. It was not merely physical pain. It felt as if a rusted, barbed blade were frantically carving through his soul. Harry emitted a shriek that was almost not human, a raw animal howl of pain and despair. His body arched as if its bones had been undone, then collapsed back to the stone, convulsing. Foam and blood spilled from his mouth. The world first flushed crimson, then an all-encompassing blackness rushed in like a tide, swallowing his senses. His consciousness, a candle in a gale, guttered. He could no longer feel his body, only the relentless, tearing pain from the depths of his being. In the blur of his mind, he thought of Jason, of Hermione, of Ron, faces like islands of concern. "I'm sorry, I might be gone." As his awareness slipped toward oblivion, a strange clarity suddenly came. He saw, no, he perceived, his body on the cold stone, limbs twisted, face contorted in torment. From the scar on his brow, wisps of black mist seeped out, threaded with a faint red glow. Above that shell, a translucent version of himself, faintly white and blurred at the edges, was rising, as if a wisp of smoke breaking free. Soul, my soul, has been pulled out. The realization slammed into him and for a moment cleared the fog from his mind. Panic and bewilderment followed as he looked down at the lifeless husk and up at the fragile, drifting silhouette of himself. Is this what death feels like? You-know-who watched with businesslike detachment. He had indeed stripped away part of Harry's soul. That much he expected. This, however, was only the first step. He wanted a more complete extraction. He raised his right hand again, its form a coiling cloud of darkness, and began to condense another sphere above his palm. This one was denser, blacker, its aura even more terrifying. The spirits within it screamed in a frenzy. The soul storm they emitted reached hungrily for the drifting fragment of Harry. "Since it's out, don't go back," Jason said without feeling. He meant to use this second, more violent soul assault to crush Harry's will, to force the soul entirely free, or to obliterate it. Harry's translucent soul tried to flee. It was like a moth caught in a spider's web, however. Movement was impossible. The second sphere grew, swollen with malice, and swung into position. Despair tightened around the spirit like a hand. Is this really how it ends? Then something changed. A sudden, piercing hum burst from the lightning-shaped scar on the body below. Where the black mist and faint red glow had seeped out, the scar erupted with a dazzling, blood-red light as bright as the sun. It was not the same darkness Jason wielded. It was raw, primal destruction, tyrannical, scorching, like a volcano awoken after an age of sleep. The light flared out of that tiny wound, furious and alive. This nascent power was overwhelming, an unparalleled malice and madness that seemed intent on dragging the whole world into an abyss. The moment it appeared, it violently collided with the dark energy clinging to Harry's translucent soul, the remnant left by you-know-who's first attack. The air sizzled with corrosive sound. More astonishingly, that blood-red destructive energy, erupting from Harry's lightning bolt scar, after clearing some of the lingering dark aura from Harry's soul, actually confronted the second, even stronger dark orb that the black mist you-know-who, Jason, was about to unleash. Two equally potent, equally evil, but fundamentally different forces met midair. The entire stone chamber trembled. Within the blood-red light from Harry's scar, a distorted, blurry phantom coalesced. It carried a nauseatingly evil aura, vaguely human in shape, but like a burning shadow, insubstantial and pure malice. It gave off a silent roar full of bitter hostility toward the black mist figure and an endless hunger for Harry's wandering soul. The temperature dropped. Fine frost bloomed on the stone walls. Jason paused, his crimson gaze sweeping over the phantom of Voldemort's remnant soul. A flicker of understanding crossed his features. A lingering remnant, he thought. Good, it saves me some trouble. His will was cold as iron. At that moment, a previously unnoticed hidden stone door at the far end of the chamber was blasted open from within by a surge of magic. Boom! Amid flying rubble, Dumbledore and Snape burst in, both radiating urgency and powerful magical fluctuations. They had been alarmed by the sudden magical burst from Voldemort's remnant and had arrived just in time. Their pupils constricted in shock. Harry's translucent soul floated in the air, contorted in pain, barely visible. His original body lay on the ground, life force faint, almost gone. Even more disturbing, the figure shrouded in black mist now radiated a pure, ancient dark power that chilled them both. This was not ordinary dark arts. This was a deeper, more fundamental darkness. Jason, stop! Dumbledore's voice rang, aged and urgent. He saw Harry's soul leaving his body, and Jason surrounded by surging darkness. The exceptionally gifted, rational, kind student who had once been willing to share his meditation with the public now looked like the most evil of dark wizards. Had Dumbledore misjudged someone again, as he had with Tom Riddle? Immense disappointment and pain hardened the tip of the headmaster's wand. He could not hesitate. Harry had no time. Snape did not hesitate either. His pale face was flecked with frost. The instant he understood, his wand came up. A blurred image of Lily holding a baby flashed before his obsidian eyes. Lily's son being tormented, his soul ripped away. A cold, murderous intent gathered at the tip of Snape's wand, barely restrained by all his discipline. Sirius, who had been feigning death on the floor, felt his heart seize the moment he saw Harry's soul slip free. 12 years of Azkaban turned to fuel. Seeing Dumbledore and Snape rush in as if facing a grave enemy, he judged the situation at once. "Stay away from Harry," he roared, abandoning his act. Bloodshot, eyes blazing with fear and fury, he sprang up and let loose a beast-like cry. Avada Kedavra! A sickly green beam, death incarnate, shot from his wand like a venomous snake toward Jason's black mist. Jason's mind registered the unexpected variable with cool detachment. Almost at the same instant, Dumbledore sent a powerful Expelliarmus, a dazzling red bolt streaking after Sirius's curse. He aimed to disarm the perpetrator and interrupt whatever evil ritual was underway. Snape's wand traced a swift arc, Sectum Sempra. Facing the combined assault of three top wizards, Jason's black mist form flickered. A deep blue light, a shield etched with the Ire rune, sprang into place, encasing him. Countless runes rotated slowly like flowing water along the shield's surface, forming a perfect, continuous cycle. Hiss! Sirius's desperate Avada Kedavra struck first. A piercing shriek rent the air, like a soul being torn. Green and blue light clashed. The runic chains screamed. Several runes shattered into black dust and dimmed. Immediately after, Dumbledore's Expelliarmus and Snape's Sectum Sempra hit the same point almost together. Bang! Bang! Jason's black mist body skidded back several meters, his feet scarring 2 dark tracks across the stone floor. The Ire rune shield flickered, its light paling as if it might collapse at any moment. Dumbledore's mighty Expelliarmus made the shield tremble violently. The rune flow caught and staggered. Snape's invisible cutting force scored the shield with a deep, ghastly white line, squealing like teeth on stone. Dumbledore, foolish kindness. Snape, misguided loyalty. Jason's voice was a cold whisper in his own mind as his black mist body writhed. Yet the 2 crimson lights in his eyes stayed terrifyingly calm. Everything remained within calculation. The time was right. Seizing this once-in-a-lifetime opening, the phantom of Voldemort's remnant soul erupted from Harry's scar. Its silent roar sharpened. Its crimson eyes flashed with ravenous malice. It condensed into a blood-red streak and lunged at Harry's weak, transparent soul. Ugh! Harry's translucent soul gave a wounded groan. The faint white light that guarded it flickered, threatening to die. Voldemort's remnant laughed silently, maniacal and eager. In the chaos, it had found the perfect moment to strike, and now lunged to corrupt and consume. In Harry's soul vision, that twisted, hateful face drew nearer, carrying all the deepest terrors of his childhood nightmares. He wanted to scream, to resist, but he did not even have the strength to move a finger. A cold aura full of endless malice touched his soul. 104. Arcane Outburst, Dumbledore's surprising discovery and difficult decision. Inside the stone chamber, time seemed to thicken and slow, pulled taut by 3 powerful currents of magic, each moving with its own will. Sirius's killing curse came first, green as the final despair in the eyes of an Azkaban prisoner, ripping through the air with unbridled fury. It was not a precise spell, but raw, reckless intent, the unleashed weight of 12 years of unjust imprisonment and the immediate terror of losing his godson. Close behind was Snape's counterstroke, an invisible blade, silent but colder and deadlier than the roar of the killing curse. The air split with an almost imperceptible crack. Where that cut passed, even light warped. This Sectum Sempra carried none of Sirius's frenzy. It was hatred honed to surgical precision and a quiet, unacknowledged resolve to protect Lily's son. Last came Dumbledore's Expelliarmus. Red light flared from the Elder Wand, but it had become something beyond the simple charm, incandescent and vast, a torrent of magic more fit to subdue a fully grown dragon. It was a light of judgment, focused, determined to strip away all sources of evil. The 3 spells, each representing a pinnacle of power in the current age, closed in from different angles, sealing off every route of escape for the black mist that had taken Jason's form. Faced with a combined assault powerful enough to turn any dark wizard to ash, the 2 crimson pinpricks at the mist's center, the core of the thing Jason had become, flickered. An indifferent, almost mechanical thought crossed it. Then let's try it. Instead of answering in kind, the thing let the momentum of the 3 spells push it back. Its black mist body was blasted outward, and the Ire rune shield formed over it of its own accord, golden rune chains flowing like liquid. The green of the killing curse struck first. Several runes overloaded where it hit, howling and crumbling into black dust. The invisible blade bit next, carving a pale, deep scar across the shield. Finally, Dumbledore's overwhelming Expelliarmus crashed into it. The shield cracked like glass struck by a hammer, then began to knit itself back together. A cool, unflinching voice inside Jason assessed the damage as if from a machine. Pain simulation, magic fluctuation controlled at 73%, black mist dispersion consistent with expectations. Perfect. Blasted against the far wall, Jason's dark form thinned, the escaping aura scattered, and the whole thing looked raggedly real. He slammed into stone, a shudder passing through the mist. A sound, almost human, came from him, and, Sirius was thrown hardest, striking the wall like a broken sack. A metallic sweetness filled his mouth, and he spat blood. He tried to rise, but Azkaban had hollowed him out. Pain blurred his vision. He dug his nails into cold stone, blood streaking from his eyes, and whispered a name between clenched teeth. Harry. Snape fared slightly better. He braced his wand on the floor and steadied himself, coiled and ready. An odd pallor crept over his face, but his obsidian eyes grew harder. The dark energy he felt in the opponent was potent, but not the same as the magic of anyone he knew. Older, purer, more like a law than a force. That hesitation vanished when he saw what had happened to Harry, his soul almost gone. Whoever had dared touch Lily's son would pay. Another silent, more lethal cutting spell gathered at Snape's wand tip, waiting for the opening. Dumbledore, the greatest wizard of the age, was utterly still. The crossing greens and reds of the curses reflected in his blue eyes, but inside him he felt only a cold, deathly gray. His perception had bypassed the clash of spells and fixed on the boy on the floor. A short while ago, when Jason's strange soul-stripping attack had struck Harry, an aura had erupted from the lightning-shaped scar on Harry's forehead. It was older and fouler than even the counterfeit dark energy Jason had been projecting, thick and inky, laced through with a ghastly, bloody radiance, pouring from the scar in frantic threads. At the center of that aura hovered an ethereal fragment, a twisted, fist-sized piece of something that uttered no sound but screamed in intent. It clung to Harry's almost transparent soul like a starving parasite. That presence, Dumbledore's hand on the Elder Wand, went as white as the parchment on his desk. It wasn't Professor Quirrell's kind of parasitism. Quirrell had been shallow, clinging. This was the source, the original. Memories surged back. The gloomy, astonishingly gifted boy from the orphanage, Tom Riddle. Dumbledore had spent years hunting the theory, piecing together the monstrous method by which Riddle sought immortality. The one insane, sacrilegious, unthinkable word that had returned to his mind for a decade: Horcrux. Now the proof was before him. That distinct aura was a fragment of Lord Voldemort's soul, tearing itself out from Harry Potter, the child Lily had saved with her life, the boy for whom so much had been risked. All his conjectures and fears snapped into a terrible, coherent chain. Harry was a Horcrux. The boy he had hoped would be the light to vanquish darkness was himself a part of that very darkness. Sybil Trelawney's prophecy, the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord, approaches, and the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, clarified in Dumbledore's mind. This was the mark. The realization did not arrive with thunder. It came as a dropping of the world into silence. Sounds dimmed, leaves of years peeled away, and Dumbledore felt the weight of age like a physical thing pressing on his shoulders. For the first time in his life, his straight back tempted him to stoop. He looked from the black mist to the writhing, bloody phantom and understood the truth that chilled him most. Jason, from the start, had not intended to kill Harry. He had been tearing the Horcrux from the boy's soul by the most brutal means he could conceive. "Severus!" Dumbledore barked. Dumbledore's voice cut through the chamber like a shriek, each syllable hauled from him as if he were breathing through broken lungs. He shot out his trembling hand and clamped onto Snape's wrist just as the other man was about to strike, as a drowning man might grab at a final reed. Snape's wand arm froze mid-motion. He tried to wrench Dumbledore's hand away, anger barely contained, murder in the black of his eyes, self-control stretched thin. "Let go! You want me to stand here and watch him kill Lily's son?" Dumbledore didn't look at him. The once omniscient, calm mind behind those eyes was racked with a pain and conflict, the likes of which neither man had ever seen. He stared instead at the blood-red phantom striving to breach the protection around Harry, at the thing that was trying to devour the boy's soul. With an effort like squeezing a single breath through a clenched jaw, he forced the words out, words that seemed to strip Snape's certainty away in an instant. "No, Severus." He swallowed as if the words themselves were heavy. "He isn't killing him. He is saving him." A thread of red light snaked from the black mist, and before it could do more, Sirius, who had just pushed himself upright, rolled his eyes, slumped back, and collapsed as something clipped him. "Stupefy," the mist said, flat and almost bored. "Quiet down." The voice from the darkness was calm now, not the croaking rasp it had used earlier. It was young, clear, only oddly altered by magic. Having hushed the noisy variable, Jason in his black mist form turned slowly to Dumbledore. The two crimson gleams that served as eyes in the fog flickered. Dumbledore inhaled, trying to steady himself against the earthquake of the revelation that Harry was a Horcrux. His face was suddenly very pale. A storm swirled in the depths of his blue eyes. Jason, this is rather dramatic. An incandescent light flared at the tip of the elder wand in his hand, and the air in the stone chamber felt to everyone as though it had thickened, as if the room itself had been halved in size by the weight of what was happening. But first things first, we deal with Harry. He did not press for Jason to reveal the Horcrux or demand an explanation for his earlier disguise. The black mist stilled, then let out a low laugh, no longer feigned hoarseness, but a genuine chuckle, distorted only slightly by the form the speaker wore. Headmaster, your perception is still as sharp as ever, but some things require a catalyst. That was an admission. Jason had done this intentionally, at least in part. Snape could not keep his fury back any longer. He stepped forward until his wand nearly touched the edge of the mist, his voice a tight hiss. A catalyst? You call this a catalyst? You nearly killed him. Jason did not even look at him. No, I am saving him. To some degree, I am saving you as well, Professor Snape, saving you from having to witness Lily's son disfigured by that darkness. Snape's whole body went rigid. That sentence hit the place he feared most. Dumbledore raised a hand to stay him. The boy he had tried to protect, sometimes from truth itself, had been carrying a malignant curse all along. Dumbledore felt the weight of his ignorance as if a cold stone had been placed on his chest. Since you brought it out, you must have a flawless plan. Dumbledore's voice cooled until it was a blade. If not, I will not hesitate to use my old method to stop this, even if it costs us dearly. Every ear in the chamber heard the hint of blood in that threat. Jason, however, answered lightly. A small, unexpected find, a fragment of Lord Voldemort's soul. Very valuable for study. At the words, Snape stared at Harry's forehead as if the skin itself had alien words written upon it. A piece of the Dark Lord's soul? Attached to Potter? The realization made his scalp prickle. Bits of things he had glimpsed through legilimency, Parseltongue before Hogwarts, occasional mental links, fell into a dreadful logic. But beneath that, something colder and deeper took root, the fear that this fragment could yet be turned into a weapon. Dumbledore stepped forward. Light from the Elder Wand brightened until it was almost painful. I want a guarantee. Harry's safety comes first, and that fragment must never become a more dangerous thing in your hands. The mist that was Jason seemed to shrug. The fog rippled. Headmaster, our ends have always matched, a stronger Harry Potter and a world without Lord Voldemort. As for methods, sometimes one can be flexible. Inside his head, Harry made a silent plea. Save me, Jason. I can still be saved. Dumbledore's frown deepened. Jason's easy answer dodged the question Dumbledore most feared to ask, whether Jason himself might be turned by such power, but time had already run thin. The fragment, forced out into the open, was furious. Each moment it lashed at Harry, stealing the boy's already fragile essence and eating away at the charm Lily had so carefully tied around him. Do it, child, Dumbledore said finally, his voice threaded with exhaustion. Show me your method. But know this, my wand will watch you always. Jason lifted his hand of black mist, palm up. What condensed there this time was not darkness but a soft golden light. Within it, intricate running sigils wove themselves into chains that shimmered in and out of being, living runes that interlocked and spun into a precise miniature magic circle. A scent like warm iron and sunlight filled the air. Sacred soul stripping art. He spoke the unfamiliar words without haste. This was not a savage rending of spirit. His aim was surgical. The golden rune circle settled over the twisted remnant of Voldemort's soul on Harry's brow. A shriek, so high and soul-piercing that it seemed beyond hearing, tore from the blood-red fragment. It writhed, screamed, fought. The rune chains snapped tight like searing irons, and the remnant hissed under them. The phantom did not give up. It exploded in a flare of red, and with that burst came a torrent of harrowing illusions. A gigantic serpent swallowing the world, a green flash of light, the image of Lily Potter falling. Snape made a sound that could have been a curse or a prayer. His face drained white, but he stood his ground. Dumbledore's eyes clouded for a moment, then cleared. But none of those visions touched Jason. The golden circle only burned brighter, its light washing away the red apparitions as if it were pure flame. Under the patient, minute work of Jason's runes, the stubborn piece of soul was teased away like a stain lifted from unpolished jade by countless invisible threads. It was incremental and precise and mercilessly irreversible. Harry felt as if he were being split by ice and warmed by fire at once. There was a tearing, bone-deep pain as the parasite was peeled free, and alongside it an astonishing warmth and peace poured into the place it vacated. He could feel the cold, tyrannical presence that had nested in his mind for 11 years being drawn out, inch by inch. When the final thread snapped, the fragment, a black fingernail-sized thing radiating malice and madness, was finally separated and cast into the golden field. It thrashed and shrieked, rootless at last. For an instant, Harry's own inner light dimmed until it seemed it might gutter out. "It's not over yet," Jason said softly. His hand shifted, the golden rune circle dissolved and reassembled with new intent. Where before there had been the clinical coldness of a surgeon's extract, now the power swelled and turned creative, alive with a rushing vitality. Sacred soul healing art. Soft golden light, like spring rain, gently sprinkled over Harry's nearly transparent soul. Light and shadow began to reform at a visible pace. The cracks torn by the Horcrux smoothed out, and the dimmed color brightened until it was pure again. A warm current spread to every corner of him, and the long-standing irritability and unease that had lived in his subconscious were washed away. Snape watched, stunned. If the earlier stripping had shown unimaginable skill, the healing now bordered on miracle. Jason's other hand of black mist produced a palm-sized crystal vial, its surface etched with dense silver runes. He flicked a finger. The stopper opened by itself, and a suction drew the still-screaming fragment of soul toward the mouth of the vial. The fragment was sucked inside with a muffled sound. The stopper sealed. The runes along the vial flared once, then went dark. Jason exhaled as if relieved and gave the crystal bottle a casual shake. "All right, he's safe for now." He tossed it to Dumbledore. The older man caught it instinctively. The cold glass made his fingers tremble. Inside, the dark shard thumped and twisted against the crystal, folding into mute, contorted human faces, faces frozen in silent screams. A piece of the Dark Lord who had ruled the wizarding world and once used it to cheat death now looked like an insect trapped under glass. Snape's Adam's apple bobbed. He stepped forward, voice rough as sand. "What kind of monster is that exactly?" The golden arcane light that had healed Harry dwindled like a spent candle. The sacred aura in the stone chamber faded with it, leaving a chill that tightened skin and silence that pressed on the ears. Jason confirmed Harry's breathing steady and his soul settled, then turned. His body of black mist rotated with the precise, remorseless motion of a war machine, locking on a new target, Sirius Black, who was sprawled nearby and just regaining consciousness. Crimson eyes took on a cold glint. With a casual flick of his wand tip, Jason dispelled the stupefy that had held Sirius. Sirius's eyes snapped open. The gloom of Azkaban and the terror of losing consciousness receded, replaced by the bewilderment of someone who had survived a catastrophe. He scanned the chamber, then fixed on the figure near him. Seeing Harry's chest rise and fall under Dumbledore's careful support, a wave of elation and residual fear crashed over him. "Harry!" He tried to push himself up, bracing his hands on the cold stone, hoarse and urgent, as if he could pour out 12 years of apology and worry in one breath. Before the first syllable had fully left his mouth, a calm voice cut through. "Lightning strike." Before the words finished, a blinding silver bolt spat from the tip of Jason's wand. It was not the soft luminescence of ordinary magic, but pure, violent electricity, bright as daylight and accompanied by a sharp crack. It struck Sirius squarely as he was half propped up. Sirius let out a sound that was almost not human, an animal howl of pain. He went rigid, then his body was slammed back onto the stone, as if an invisible hand had thrown him down, then flipped and convulsed in devastating, jerking spasms like a fish cast ashore. Wisps of greenish smoke curled from his scorched robes, and the chamber filled with the smell of burnt flesh and singed hair. His thick black hair stood on end, each strand crackling with tiny blue sparks. Foam mixed with saliva leaked from the corners of his open mouth. His eyes bulged, bloodshot, his face contorted into an expression of raw, disbelieving agony. On the other side of the chamber, Snape watched. For the briefest instant, the corner of his mouth twitched, an almost imperceptible smirk. The flicker of schadenfreude passed quickly, replaced by a cold, clinical gaze. He recognized the discipline on display, punishment administered by a superior to a disobedient tool. If Jason had been dangerous before, this methodical cruelty raised his estimate of Jason's threat to a new level. Dumbledore froze, then a bitter, helpless smile crossed his lined face. He watched Sirius convulse, then the unmoved figure who had delivered the punishment. The energy in that lightning had been controlled with terrible precision, enough to inflict the maximum possible pain without causing lasting damage. It was not mere punishment, it was a deliberate warning. "Enough, Jason. I think he's learned his lesson," Dumbledore said, at last striking a note of command that cut through the crackling air. At the words, Jason withdrew his wand. The electrical noise snapped off. Sirius came down in a heap, limp but still twitching in little spasms. His robes were blackened and smoking, his skin blistered in places. He looked as if he had been dragged from a chimney and then dredged through a fire. He gasped, low, guttural sounds escaping him. Terror and a wounded grievance shone in his eyes. He tried to lift his head. First, he stared at Jason with a mix of awe and fear. Then he turned toward Harry, who was being helped to sit by Dumbledore. Sirius opened his mouth as if to speak. An apology, a reassurance, but the lightning had tightly tangled his tongue. His teeth still chattered, and his muscles felt rigid and uncooperative. No sound came from him that could be called a word. Memories came back to Harry like fragments of a broken film. Jason had watched Sirius's ruined figure with a small, cold satisfaction before he had sauntered to his side. A shape of black mist had loomed there, throwing a chill over everything. To use an unforgivable curse on me. Humph, he should remember this, a cold voice had said. Then there had been pain, so much pain, darkness, the sensation of his soul being torn from his body. At the end of that boundless night, there had been a warm, golden pull and a voice urgent and powerful that sounded a lot like Jason's. He surfaced slowly, as if dragging himself up through a deep, heavy sea. Every limb ached. It felt as though his body had been filled with lead. His eyelids were glued shut, and it took enormous effort to peel them apart to a narrow slit. Shapes and blurred colors flickered until they resolved into a familiar, worried face. Madame Pomfrey, dabbing his forehead with a damp towel. "Oh, good heavens, Potter, you're awake," she said, relief pouring from her voice. She put the towel down and reached for a potion nearby. Harry blinked and tried to move. Memories, snatches of the stone chamber, the black mist, those red eyes flashed through his mind. He remembered the cold, the absolute terror of dying. Then, faintly, that tug back to life and the voice that had brought him back. "I'm still alive?" he croaked. "Yes, Harry, you're very much alive." The voice was familiar and gentle. He turned his head and saw Albus Dumbledore standing by the bed, his blue eyes soft with apology and relief. The silver beard was neat, but the lines around his eyes were deeper than Harry had ever noticed. Professor Snape stood near the wall, arms folded, his face as stony as ever, though now his dark eyes watched Harry with an intensity that seemed almost intent. At the foot of the bed sat a man who made Harry's stomach drop. He was a mess. His wizarding robes were burnt and full of holes. He smelled faintly of smoke, and his hair stuck up as if he'd been struck by lightning. It was the same man from the stone chamber, the one who'd been acting odd and shouting about serving the Dark Lord. Harry's hand went for his wand, then fell back useless. He stared at the man, suspicion and fury swelling in him. When the man met his gaze, he visibly stiffened. Bloodshot gray eyes flickered with something warm and painful, hurt, maybe even shame. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but only let out a small, wavering sigh. "Principal," Harry managed. His voice rose, edged with anger. "Why is he here? Wasn't he one of the Dark Lord's servants? In the chamber he was." He couldn't finish. The picture of the man offering him to Voldemort burned in his mind. Dumbledore's smile was gentle, sad. "Harry, a great deal happened while you were unconscious. His role in your final battle was not what you thought. Mr. Black's position there was more complicated." "Complicated?" Harry repeated, bewildered. He remembered nothing of anything complicated, only the man's clumsy threats and that awful black mist. Harry searched Dumbledore's face. "And the black mist? And Jason? I thought I heard Jason's voice. Did he save me?" Dumbledore's expression shifted. His eyes were heavy with things he wasn't ready to say yet. Yes, what you heard was correct. Jason arrived in time. He confronted that thing and dealt with it, and he also resolved a deeper crisis within you. He hesitated, then added, I will explain everything when you are stronger. For now, you need rest. But I think there is someone very important you should meet, though our first meeting may not have been pleasant. Someone important? Harry glanced at the charred man again, confusion knotting in his chest. Dumbledore turned his gaze to the man, and with an encouraging tilt, spoke his name. I think it's time, Sirius. Then, softly to Harry, this gentleman before you is Mr. Sirius Black. Sirius Black. The name exploded in Harry's head. All at once, the facts he'd been fed before, the accusations, the betrayal, the supposed murders, collided with the image of the disheveled hurt man in the chair and with Jason's earlier word that Sirius was framed. So, he's here. So, he's my godfather. The revelation felt like a new, sharp thing under his ribs. He stared, breath caught between disbelief and something like a fierce, aching hope. He is Sirius Black? Harry still could not quite accept the sight before him. He looked from Dumbledore to the man with incredulous shock. The man called Sirius was pale, his body trembling with a mix of excitement and nerves. Seeing the blend of shock and disgust on Harry's face, his own eyes filled with pain, guilt, and a fierce longing. He tried to stand, but his legs shook uncontrollably. Each movement forced a suppressed groan from him, as if the effort had reawakened some old injury. Dumbledore smiled, though his voice was steady and firm. Yes, Harry, he is Sirius Black, and as Jason may have already told you, he was wrongly accused back then. The real traitor was Peter Pettigrew. Wrongly accused? Harry murmured, the phrase feeling distant and unreal. In the world he'd known, Sirius Black had been a symbol of evil, bound up with his parents' deaths. Dumbledore saw the confusion and hostility still written on Harry's face and let out a soft sigh. He needed to break through the wall of lies Harry had been raised on. Harry, there's something else I think you should know. Dumbledore glanced encouragingly at Sirius. This man before you he is your godfather, Sirius Black. Your parents' best friend and the guardian they chose for you. Godfather, guardian. The words struck Harry like a hammer blow. He stared, stunned. He had always believed he was alone, abandoned not only by his parents, but by any family. In the cupboard under the stairs, he had fantasized so many times about a relative coming to take him away from the Dursleys. Now a wave of joy and disbelief broke through all those defenses. Tears filled his eyes. Sirius could no longer hold himself back. He forced himself up from the chair. Each step was shaky and painful, but he hurried to the bedside. His body was still trembling. His voice was rough with emotion. Harry, my boy, I'm sorry I couldn't be there to protect you sooner. He reached a trembling hand toward Harry's hair, then stopped, suddenly self-conscious of his disheveled, almost singed appearance. Harry reached out and gripped Sirius's rough, shaking hand. Tears finally fell, hot and sudden, dripping onto the quilt. Godfather, I really have family, he said. He felt warmth and strength in Sirius's grip, a fierce love that had lasted 12 years. Snape watched from the edge of the room, arms folded, a faint sneer on his face. But when he heard Harry call Sirius Godfather and saw how tightly Harry held on, something complex and unexpected flickered in the dark depths of Snape's eyes. He unconsciously uncrossed his arms. The hospital wing door opened quietly, and the conversation inside stopped as everyone turned. Harry fumbled with his still stiff arm under Sirius's clumsy guidance. Ron propped himself against the headboard, idly tossing an empty potion bottle. Hermione stood with her back to the door, flipping frantically through a bulky history of magic book. The pages whispered with each turn. Jason entered carrying a wicker basket, breaking the strange hush. At the sight of him, Sirius stiffened for a moment, his bloodshot gray eyes showing gratitude, awe, and a residual fear from whatever had been done to him the night before. Jason, Harry stopped his movement and smiled palely. Thank you. If it weren't for you. Ron caught the falling bottle and grumbled. Yeah, Jason, you're amazing. Jason set the basket on the bedside table. The smell of pastries and potions rose pleasant and sweet. He glanced at Hermione, still facing away, her curly hair falling over her shoulders, and called softly, Hermione, Jason Lester. Hermione spun around and slammed the book shut hard enough to make the bed frame vibrate. You big bad meanie, she accused. Something so dangerous happened. Why didn't you tell me? Not even a hint. Her eyes reddened and her voice trembled with fear. Do you know how scared I was? I felt like I was going to break. I was afraid something would happen to you all. I was afraid Harry would. Jason didn't argue. He took a neatly wrapped chocolate frog from the basket and handed it to her, while a hand smoothed her hair in a comforting gesture. Hermione's tight expression melted. Tears spilled down her face. She gripped the chocolate frog like a lifeline and didn't brush Jason's hand away. Sorry, it happened so suddenly, but you were all very brave. I'm proud of you, he said. Hermione's sobs softened into quiet sniffles. She mumbled, At least you have a conscience. Jason smiled, pulled a tissue from the basket to dab her cheeks, and, looking at her tear-streaked face, added, It won't happen again next time. Don't worry. Then he turned to Harry and Ron. How are you feeling? Madame Pomfrey says you're recovering quickly. Much better, thanks, Jason, Harry said, nodding. Jason looked to Sirius. A green light gathered in his free hand and he flicked his wrist. The light washed over Sirius, who tensed briefly but made no effort to dodge when no one else reacted. The emerald glow flowed from head to toe, and Sirius let his eyes close. The exhaustion of over a decade and the fresh wounds from the previous night visibly eased away. Everyone watched, fascinated again by the boy's healing magic. Sirius opened his eyes and gave Jason a look that mixed gratitude, awe, and something like disbelief. Jason lingered with a few words of comfort for the group, then gave them a conspiratorial wink. Get some rest. When you're fully recovered tomorrow, I'll give you a surprise. A surprise? Ron immediately brightened. What kind of surprise? Hermione and Harry leaned forward with curiosity. Jason shook his head playfully. I can't say yet. Wouldn't be a surprise if I did. He paused, then added, Anyway, it's a big guy you'll absolutely love. A big guy? How big? Ron's eyes shone with excitement. In the great hall at dusk, the long tables of the 4 houses were piled high with food. Rare delicacies, seldom seen on ordinary days, shimmered enticingly in the candlelight. The rich aroma of roast turkey and the sweet tang of pumpkin juice mingled in the air, but they couldn't quite banish the hush of anticipation. Students whispered like a hive of nervous bees. Harry, Ron, and Hermione sat at the Gryffindor table. Madame Pomfrey's care had mostly restored their color. Harry's scar no longer throbbed with that heart-stopping burn, but the memory of his soul being torn, of something ripped from him, still pricked his nerves like a cold iron thorn. Ron was eyeing a plate of fried sausages with an easy grin. Hermione was quieter than usual, her gaze drifting now and then toward Jason, who sat not far away, speaking in low tones with Percy Weasley. Jason's expression was composed, as if the troll on Halloween, the battle in the Forbidden Forest, and yesterday's ordeal were merely ordinary extracurriculars. That composure was itself a pressure. Headmaster Dumbledore rose from the staff table. His silver beard swayed in the candlelight, and his blue eyes, magnified by half-moon spectacles, swept over the room. The great hall fell silent. Another school year draws to a close, he said, his voice clear and resonant, reaching every corner. This year, Hogwarts has witnessed extraordinary courage, the dawning of change, and a darkness we hope never returns. He did not list every sensational moment. There was no need. The Halloween troll, the fight in the Forbidden Forest, and the fragment pulled from Harry's forehead were all still very much on everyone's minds. Dumbledore's gaze lingered on the Gryffindor table and settled on Jason. First, I must make special mention of a student, Mr. Jason Lester. A stir ran through the hall. For many, his name had become a legend in a single year. Admiration, curiosity, disbelief, shifting from face to face. Mr. Lester has not only displayed astonishing academic talent, Dumbledore continued, voice threaded with admiration, but has selflessly shared his spirit-guiding meditation with the wider magical community. He paused to let the words sink in. This is no mere academic achievement. It is a contribution to the future well-being of the magical world. It opens a new era, an era in which more people may touch the true essence of magic. Professors and students alike took the praise in. Professor McGonagall sat ramrod straight, pride softening her stern features. Flitwick whispered excitedly to Sprout. At the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy watched with envy. Snape, from his seat at the staff table, regarded the announcement like a cold probe, his dark eyes unreadable even as every word reached him. With that, Dumbledore went on, and in the face of sudden darkness, Mr. Lester showed wisdom, strength, and responsibility beyond his years. He protected his fellow students and defended the peace of Hogwarts. Heat rose through the hall at that. The details of the Forbidden Forest fight had been whispered about, but to hear Dumbledore spell out Jason's central role stunned many into a new respect. Harry and Ron exchanged a look of shared pride. Hermione, lips pressed together, watched Jason with warm admiration. For this, I award 100 points to Gryffindor for Mr. Jason Lester's epoch-making contributions, extraordinary courage, and outstanding leadership. Oh, the Gryffindor table erupted. 100 points was almost decisive. But courage is never solitary, Dumbledore added, turning his gaze to the trio. Mr. Harry Potter, Mr. Ron Weasley, and Miss Hermione Granger also showed bravery, loyalty, and wisdom. He was nodding to their roles in the Troll incident and their support in the Forbidden Forest. For their courage and wisdom, I award 50 points to each. 3 more roars of celebration shook the hall. 100 plus 3 times 50, a total of 250 points, pushed Gryffindor to an overwhelming lead. A few disgruntled boos came from Slytherin, but were drowned by Gryffindor's cheers. Now, let us see the fate of the House Cup. Dumbledore smiled and stroked his beard. The banners above the staff table shimmered, Ravenclaw's blue and Hufflepuff's yellow dimmed. For a breath, everyone held their breath. Then Slytherin's silver snake faded too, and only Gryffindor's red and gold blazed like dawn. Gryffindor wins, Dumbledore announced. The sound was deafening. Students leapt onto tables, hugging, shouting, tossing hats. Harry and Ron embraced and whooped, bumping shoulders in giddy triumph. Hermione smiled, more restrained, clapping until her hands hurt. McGonagall wiped her eyes. It was the sweetest house cup she'd seen as head of Gryffindor. Flitwick and Sprout beamed. Snape alone looked sullen, more displeased than ever. He finished his meal, rose with a smooth, cold motion, and left without a backward glance. When the feast reached its peak, Jason did not join the revelry. He accepted a few polite congratulations from older students, then slipped away through the noisy crowd. He had other things on his mind. In a dim, stone corridor leading toward the dungeons, the air smelled of damp rock. A dark shape seemed to ooze out of the shadow and blocked his path. Professor Snape. Mr. Lester. Snape's voice was cold as stones grinding. Enjoying your glorious victory? Enjoying being the center of attention? Not particularly, Professor. It was the expected outcome and a few necessary steps, Jason said, standing tall in the gloom. Snape stepped closer, his hooked nose sharp, his mouth a thin line. Dumbledore has put you on a very bright stage. Do you think that's a gift? He leaned in until Jason could feel the chill off him. That's a bullseye, Lester. A huge, conspicuous bullseye. Potter lived because of the ancient magic his mother left. What do you have? Your arrogance? Your self-proclaimed arcane? Jason didn't flinch. He met Snape's dark eyes evenly, reading the complicated, unrateable moods there. Envy, fear, something like respect. Thank you for your concern, Professor, Jason said. I will make sure there are enough arrows for anyone who draws a bow, or that they never get the chance to draw one. Snape snorted. A sharp, icy sound flicked his robes like an angry bat and melted back into the corridor's deeper black, his footsteps fading. Jason watched him go for a few seconds, then continued to Gryffindor Tower. The common room was warm and rowdy. The fireplace chased away the night chill. Fred and George were loudly hawking their latest, Champion Commemorative Edition dung bombs to a mob of delighted younger students. Gags fused with alchemy, tracking charms, and even a nasty surprise for anyone being a squib. Laughter and shrieks mixed with the crackle of the fire. Jason went to a quieter corner and unrolled a huge sheet of dragon-hide parchment from his storage ring. He spread it out on a long table. On it were intricate rune arrays and architectural diagrams, inked in silvery lines so precise they sent a prickle across the skin. Every symbol and stroke thrummed with suggestion of power. Harry, Ron, and Hermione found him. What did Snape say to you? Harry asked. He'd seen Snape storm out earlier and was concerned. Friendly advice, Jason replied without looking up, his quill still moving as he added new runes, on how to last longer in the spotlight. Ron peered at the sheet, then recoiled with a dizzying, Hermione's face, however, was rapt. The diagrams were far beyond any Hogwarts coursework she'd seen, exact layouts for energy flow, annotations that spoke of subtle balances and new constructs. She reached out almost reverently and let her fingertips rest on a shimmering line. Jason paused and finally looked up. The firelight caught in his eyes, turning something fierce and fervent in them. He tapped the center of the sheet with his quill, where a vast energy matrix pulsed, a heart of countless interlocking runes. "Yes," he said. The clamor from the feast outside was cut off by thick stone walls. In the headmaster's office, the fireplace flames danced in silence, throwing shifting light over the rotating silver instruments on the shelves. Dumbledore sat behind a large desk, his long fingers resting on the golden-red perch where Fawkes, the phoenix, sat, his hand no longer stroking the bird. Through his half-moon spectacles, his deep blue eyes regarded the two men opposite him with something like weariness. "Sirius, Fudge has signed your full pardon, and there's a substantial settlement as well," Dumbledore said. His voice was tired as he added, "But you can't stay at Hogwarts forever. What do you plan to do?" Sirius Black shifted in his chair. He looked oddly contained, even anxious, rather than his usual defiant self. "I don't know, Albus. Look after Harry? He still has to go back to his aunt's for the summer. Where am I supposed to go? Buy a manor and count galleons until I rot? Or go back to that damned house?" He ran a hand irritably through his freshly washed but still mussed hair. 12 years in Azkaban. I've had enough of being alone." By the window, Snape's dark silhouette seemed to melt into the shadow the moonlight could not touch. He let out a cold snort. "Perhaps you can go to the Forbidden Forest and howl at the moon with Lupin, reliving your glorious student days. Some people's talent for getting into trouble isn't cured by a change of name." "That stings," Sirius muttered. The remark seemed to touch a raw nerve. Sirius leapt to his feet and glared at the man's back. "You greasy old bat. Want to take a swing?" "Enough," Dumbledore said quietly. Sirius sank back, muttering curses under his breath, just as a soft knock sounded at the office door. "Come in." Jason pushed the door open, still carrying the faint warmth of the Gryffindor common room about him. He took in the three men without seeming affected by the heavy mood. "Headmaster, Professor Snape, Mr. Black." Sirius's anger evaporated the moment he saw him, replaced by eager excitement. Dumbledore gestured to the empty chair beside him. "Jason, have a seat." He chose his words carefully, looking at the young man with a steady, deep gaze. "We were just discussing future plans. Yours, in particular, is one of the most important variables. The scale of your project is already astonishing." Snape finally turned. His obsidian eyes bored into Jason. "More than astonishing, ridiculously enormous. Lester, are you sure your pile of rocks can actually fly? And won't it collapse and become a new acromantula nest in the Forbidden Forest? I don't want my investment dumped in the Black Lake." Sirius, by contrast, practically leaned forward, his eyes alight like a boy's. "Jason, your flying castle. Really? It's almost done?" Jason nodded. "The main load-bearing foundation is finished. I plan the first test flight of the floating city tomorrow." The words seemed to make the air in the room thicken. Sirius gasped and nearly sprang from his chair. Snape's face froze into disbelief, as if he were looking at a madman. Dumbledore's hand tightened on Fawkes's perch without his meaning to. "Tomorrow," all three voices echoed, with varying tones. Dumbledore's held the most gravity. "That's not the movement of a chess piece. For a structure of that magnitude, the energy needed to lift and stabilize a floating city, if a single component fails, the consequences could be unimaginable." Jason answered calmly. "Right now, only the core load-bearing foundation is complete, roughly 500 meters across. It's only the first phase of the whole floating city. After it takes to the air, I'll continue building the urban sections and defensive systems up there. It will grow larger." "You intend to add mass in the air?" Snape's brows drew together. He stepped closer, incredulous. "The ground can't contain your ambition, can it? Lester, you're building a mountain and pretending you can make it float, and then you'll keep piling more on in the sky." He came nearer with the sharp anxiety of an investor whose capital was at stake. "My galleons aren't for you to throw into the air. How can you guarantee your new arcane theory won't turn into an expensive scrap heap mid-flight? What is the energy core? How will it withstand high-altitude winds? Is the redundancy in the anti-gravity rune array truly reliable? A string of pointed questions stabbed at the plan. Jason didn't spend time answering them in words. He extended his right hand, palm up. A soft silver-blue light gathered there and quickly constructed an astonishingly complex three-dimensional model composed of countless runes and threads of energy. It hovered, rotated slowly, exquisitely intricate, an order and beauty that seemed to draw the room into it. Several of the office's silver instruments slowed as if an unseen force choked them. "This is a simulation of the core rune array's energy flow," Jason said evenly. "It doesn't rely on a wizard's innate magic. It draws free elements from the environment and converts them into arcane energy through the core. Stability comes from a triple redundancy system and 17 secondary balancing arrays. The materials have been heavily reinforced by alchemical processes. Their strength surpasses any known magical metal." Snape stared at the light model, his Adam's apple bobbing. Words failed him. It was beyond his expertise, but the power and ingenuity in it were unmistakable. "A completely new energy system," Dumbledore murmured, leaning forward. He looked at Jason with a gravity that made the question feel heavier than the room. "Jason, Lester, what is your purpose in building this? A refuge far from conflict, or a weapon suspended above the world?" The question seemed to lower the temperature in the room. Jason let the model fold back into his hand and vanish. The instruments resumed their motion. "When it needs to be a sanctuary, it will be the strongest shield," he said. "When it needs to be a weapon, it will be the sharpest sword." He did not equivocate. Sirius, blood humming, slapped his thigh and let out a laugh. "Brilliant! A flying castle! If James knew, he'd want the world's largest dung bomb launcher fitted to it. Oh, can it be made invisible? Can we put cannons on it?" Snape's mouth twitched in a noise that might have been approval. He wanted to see, with his own eyes, whether this arrogant boy would actually heave that ludicrous pile of stone and the galleons tied to it into the sky. Dumbledore sighed, a long, accepting sound. "All right, Jason, if you're resolved, we will be there to witness it." He met the young man's calm gaze. "Specific time?" Jason looked up, meeting the shock, curiosity, doubt, and a touch of fanaticism in the faces of three of the wizarding world's most prominent minds. "Dawn, at sunrise." 111. Sirius's investment and request. The meeting ended in an uneasy silence. Dumbledore rubbed his temples as if he could squeeze out some of the fatigue brought on by the avalanche of information. Snape drifted away first like a ghost. He needed time to process, or at least to steel himself for whatever disaster might come tomorrow. As Jason was about to leave, Sirius hurried to catch him at the doorway. "Jason," he called. The swagger he had shown earlier in front of Snape was gone. He stood half in shadow, moonlight from a high window cutting across a pale, weathered face. His once defiant gray eyes were dulled, rimmed with anxiety. I want to learn from you," he stammered. "I know my skills are barely enough to keep myself safe, let alone protect Harry." His gaze clung to Jason as if the younger man were his last hope. In the stone chamber, confronted with that terrifying black, mist-like figure, he had been overwhelmed like a child, burned and stunned, even electrocuted until he was charred. When Voldemort's remnant soul appeared, Sirius had only been able to fling out a desperate, futile killing curse and then watch helplessly as Harry teetered on the brink of death. The impotence of that moment and the terror of almost losing Harry had haunted him like 1,000 needles. "Azkaban took 12 years from me," he said. "That place drained everything, my strength, my hope." His voice went low, edged with self-mockery. "But the House of Black's old junk is still there. Galleons, manors, the whole lot. I want to sell it, turn it into galleons, and give it to you." He flushed with a little embarrassment, ashamed of having to barter his family's legacy. "To help fund your floating city. Those things aren't worth holding on to. I'll never go back to number 12 Grimmauld Place, even in death." He stepped closer, pleading. "That way I can learn from you, stay by your side, and, well, maybe better protect Harry." Sirius gave a crooked, exhausted smile. "Honestly, with how weak I am now, I probably couldn't beat Harry, even after what he's been through. I've failed him as a godfather." Jason watched him quietly, reading the raw sincerity and pain in a man who had once been all spirit and bravado. He felt the weight of Sirius's words. fierce love for Harry, bewilderment about his own future, and a desperate hunger for power. "Mr. Black, I appreciate the offer," Jason said gently. "The inheritance of the House of Black is yours. You're free to do what you wish with it." He smiled, not wanting to reject what sounded like an enormous investment outright. "If you truly want to learn, I can teach you the basics. For deeper instruction, I'll need a formal agreement." "I'll sign anything, as long as it doesn't harm Harry," Sirius replied immediately, without waiting to hear the exact terms. "It's not sinister," Jason said. "Mostly a confidentiality agreement, and also a contract to formally employ you. There's no reason for me to be the only one taking the risk." He paused, choosing his words. "Your body is still fragile from 12 years in Azkaban. Your magic core is damaged. Jumping straight into high-intensity magic could do more harm than good, even permanent damage." Disappointment flashed across Sirius's face, but Jason's next sentence brightened him. "Start with basic meditation." "This isn't the sort of meditation you're used to," Jason explained. "It's focused on guiding and organizing spiritual power, strengthening the body, and nourishing the magic core. It helps restore what Azkaban took away and rebuild magical reserves. Alongside that, you'll learn basic runes and simple spells, tools that'll make my later lessons make sense and help you in future fights." Sirius nodded again and again. The dull light in his eyes was replaced by a new, hungry flame. He sounded almost impatient. "Good, I'll do it. Anything to get stronger and keep Harry safe. If it takes memorizing every blasted House of Black book, I'll do it." Jason smiled at his eagerness. "The path is long and hard, but you'll see results if you persevere." He shifted the conversation to the other matter that clearly weighed on Sirius. "The floating city will need reliable guards. If you're willing, you could take a position of responsibility there." Those words offered Sirius something he hadn't allowed himself in years: a purpose and a place to belong. No longer merely an escaped prisoner in need of protection, he could become a guardian. Agreement settled between them. Dumbledore and Snape, who had stepped away and returned, appeared at the other end of the corridor, obviously having overheard the tail end of the conversation. Relief softened Dumbledore's features. He approached Sirius. "I'm very glad you've come to this decision," he said. "The past is the past. The future is what matters now. Learning from Jason is a wise choice. His knowledge is beyond what we imagined." Encouraged, Sirius straightened, a trace of his old confidence returning. Snape, however, kept his usual icy expression, arms folded, looking between Jason and Sirius with a thinly veiled scorn. "Humph," he muttered. "Black, keep up with your lessons by all means, but don't waste everything and end up too poor to buy a decent broom." Turning to Jason, his gaze sharpened, threaded with a strangely pennant of anticipation. "Lester, I hope whatever enchanted stones you've piled up don't come falling out of the sky tomorrow and crush Hogwarts. That would be an unpleasant surprise." With that, he swept off, black robes whispering, leaving only fading footsteps. Dumbledore merely shook his head, saying nothing in rebuke. He looked toward Jason and Sirius, a hopeful smile on his face. "Then first thing tomorrow morning, I very much look forward to witnessing a miracle. We will all come to your construction site to observe the floating city's maiden flight." Sirius nodded eagerly, already imagining the earth-shaking spectacle Jason had promised. Plans were made. Before dawn, a test flight that might change the magical world was about to begin. The morning mist carried the damp chill of the forbidden forest. The closer they came, the clearer the low hum in the air became, a vibration like the snore of some sleeping giant. Hermione's compass in her pocket had spun wildly, then locked with a soft click. Jason stopped at the edge of what looked like an ordinary clearing. He reached out and swiped his hand through the air. The space before them rippled like water, an invisible barrier dissolved. The world split open into myth. First came the sound. The hum swelled 1,000-fold into a tangible wave that rushed at them and made their eardrums tingle. Then came the sight, and everyone froze. All their whispered guesses died when they saw what lay before them. On a circular plain so vast it seemed to defy scale, a black, silent mountain range had been laid out like a foundation. It was made of countless precisely joined megaliths. Its surface was as smooth as a mirror, its edges cut sharper than blades. It rose more than 10 meters high, its shadow swallowing them, and it stretched away in a black horizon that might have been endless. Sirius made a strangled noise and his wand clattered onto the damp earth. Merlin's beard, I thought you meant a big house, he muttered, rubbing his eyes as if trying to wake from a ridiculous dream. Ron gaped, pointing first at the structure and then at distant peaks whose outlines had been unnervingly altered. Did you chew those mountains like biscuits? You said you'd move mountains, and you actually did it. Even more unsettling were the hundreds of animate rock constructs working around the foundation. Some were taller than a house, hefting boulders with heavy steps. Others used limbs of stone to polish slabs, showering sparks. Each strike sent a small tremor through the ground. I can't believe you did it after the last construction, Hermione said, excitement and disbelief fighting in her voice. She tried to analyze what she saw with logic, but her mind went blank. Jason turned away from the stunned group and leaned against a rock about waist-high. Alchemical constructs, he said calmly. They handled the initial build. Without them, it would have taken 100 years. Dumbledore's half-moon spectacles had slipped. He pushed them back up with fingers that trembled just enough to betray him. Astonishment lit his face. Snape stiffened, took a half-step back, and tightened his hand around his wand beneath his sleeve. He had mocked the idea the day before as mere clever enchantment. What lay now before him exceeded his private catalog of magic. Even though he had seen glimpses of it before, it had never been like this. This was beyond technique. It felt like a miracle. Harry and Ron stood rooted, their minds giving up on forming coherent thought. They looked at their former classmate, the one they'd once helped, and could not imagine he had actually pulled this off. It was like discovering your deskmate had built an aircraft carrier in his spare time. Jason's gaze swept the crowd and slowed on Snape. The potion master crouched, picked up a pinch of soil blackened by escaping energy, and sniffed it. He said nothing. His face was more solemn than any scorn he'd shown before. Jason resumed leading them, walking on the ground compacted by the stoneworkers toward the Black Range. With every step, the air thickened, breathing became difficult. The atmosphere seemed to gain weight, each inhale a physical compression rather than a trick of the mind. Sirius stepped back, pressing a hand to his chest, his heart, wounded by years in Azkaban, protesting. The structure did not feel like a man-made building so much as a god-sculpted meteor. Its obsidian surface was covered in runes that were not fixed. They flowed beneath the stone like living blood, forming massive, interlinked arrays that threw a faint, nebula-like arcane glow. Jason extended a single finger and touched a megalith at the edge. The complex patterns flared as if acknowledging him. Every stone has undergone special arcane treatment and runic inscription, he said, his voice carrying across the plain. In theory, any of them could float independently. He pulled his hand back and patted the cold surface. The sound of his palm landed like a dull thud and then spread. When connected as a whole, their load-bearing capacity increases beyond what you can imagine. Leaning against the stone, Jason opened his hands. Magic, by nature, defies reason. Runes that manipulate the world's underlying rules are doubly so. Dumbledore removed his spectacles, not to clean them, but to hide a flicker of disquiet. He bent close to the stones, their flowing light reflected in his eyes. He remembered blueprints he and another bright young wizard had once sketched on a summer afternoon, dreams of a wizarding nation, of reshaping the world. Those plans now looked like children's sandcastles beside this cold, rational edifice that hummed with inexhaustible power. Where their youthful dreams had contained wild enthusiasm, this was the cool execution of power. Dumbledore felt a chill, not aimed at Jason, but at the world. Something Pandora-shaped had been opened. Snape's face was very grave. One hand stayed tucked inside his robe. He drove his magic like fine needles into his own temples to sharpen memory and perception. A faint crimson glow burned in the depths of one pupil, as if he tried to force the flowing runes into his eyes forever. As a potion master and a man who had delved deeply into the dark arts, he found himself coveting this miracle. He searched for flaws. He had invested part of his family's inheritance and his private reserves. The returns were staggering, but that was not what stung. The real wound was the humiliation. Severus Snape, Hogwarts' youngest potion master and a self-styled master of magic, felt like a first year who had just learned Lumos. He needed to understand this thing, or he feared being consumed by the powerlessness it inspired. Sirius's reaction was simple. He looked at the massive black object, then back at Harry beside him. For a moment he thought of number 12, Grimmauld Place. Gloomy, oppressive, a house full of family curses and madness. That too was a kind of castle, a prison for souls. But this enormous black construct before them, was something else entirely. It represented power, absolute protection, an indestructible bastion. If Harry could live in a place like this— Sirius's fists clenched until his nails dug into his palms. For the first time, he clearly saw how ridiculous his old notions of revenge and righteous daring were beside true power. Harry's mind went blank. He watched Jason standing calm before the mountain-like structure, a figure at once familiar and alien. This was the friend who shared Bertie Bott's every flavor beans with him, the friend who answered questions in class. And yet, behind everyone's backs, in the depths of the Forbidden Forest, this same friend had accomplished something that even Dumbledore had been moved by. Alienation and a strange, proud sense of shared honor warred inside him until he was speechless. Ron kicked a pebble. "So this thing is just a bunch of rocks enchanted with the ultimate Wingardium Leviosa?" he said, half smirking. Hermione, by contrast, was rapt. Her quill hovered uselessly over her notebook. She could not find a place to begin. She had been part of the construction, even of the design, but she had not expected the rune array to violate conservation of energy and bend the geometry of space itself. The lines shifted and reconfigured at microsecond speeds, forming a dynamic equilibrium she could not parse. It looked like a new system of knowledge, one she had never seen or imagined. Only by seeing the finished work did it feel real, and she felt like someone standing at the door of an infinite library who could not even read the title of the first book. The hunger to understand and the frustration at not being able to were almost physical. At the far side of the clearing, the Weasley twins whispered excitedly. Fred jabbed George in the ribs. "George, did you hear that? Every piece can fly. If we used this for the foundation of the shop, imagine it outside Snape's office window." George's eyes glittered dangerously. "Too small-minded, Fred. We'll put it outside the minister's office. When Fudge comes out for a meeting, he'll look up, and our dung bomb ad will be right in his face." Around them, the unceasing rock servants halted in perfect unison. They turned and withdrew to the perimeter of the clearing, forming a silent ring like soldiers at attention. From the edge of the foundation, a stone staircase rose without a sound. Jason climbed it, step by steady step, until he was over 10 meters above the foundation and standing in its very center. Beneath his feet, a circular core rune array glowed, larger and more intricate than any of the surrounding circuits, like a metal lotus of light and mithril blooming under him. "Everyone, please retreat to a safe distance," he called. His voice came from above, oddly resonant. Dumbledore and the others obeyed, moving back several hundred meters with all eyes fixed on the small figure atop the giant. Jason closed his eyes and spread his arms. He began to chant, ancient, arcane syllables that felt out of place in their time. Each word seemed to carry a substance, a pressure that struck at everyone's chest. The core array beneath him flared as if a sun rose from the stone, a purple brilliance that stabbed into the sky. From that center erupted countless patterns of magic, golden threads like electric serpents tearing across the foundation at a speed they could actually see. They raced over every giant slab, igniting each rune they touched. In an instant, the entire 500-meter square foundation was wrapped in a searing skin of arcane light. That heart-stopping surge built into a tangible gale that swept outward, flapping robes and nearly knocking everyone off their feet. For several minutes, the dazzling light roared and rolled across the platform, bathing the clearing in a glow like an alien nebula. Then, as suddenly as it had risen, the light began to ebb from the outer edges inward. The patterns dimmed as though their veins had been drained of blood, and one by one the luminous runes died away, leaving the rocks the deep, mute color they had worn before. Silence fell. The colossal black object still lay where it had been, intimately fused to the earth, stubborn and ancient. The violent fluctuations that had filled the air moments before had vanished without a trace, leaving only the cool morning breeze from the forest to brush everyone's rigid faces. Magic energy dissipation exceeds 90%. Rune circuits extinguished, Snape said, his voice cold and dry. His tone was not mocking so much as clinical. The simple, dissecting calm made the failure sting worse than any sarcasm. Theoretically, a failed energy infusion. Attempting perpetual levitation through crude stacking was never more than a child's dream. He adjusted his black robes with the satisfied air of someone who had said, "I told you so." As an investor, he might have been disappointed, but as a professor, fluent in ancient runes and potion-making, he found a grim comfort in the endurance of the old rules. The world, he implied, was not so easily overturned. Dumbledore said nothing. He just watched, his face unreadable, as if he were calculating or perhaps regretting something. Hermione felt as if an invisible hand had squeezed her heart. She gripped her notebook so hard her knuckles went white. It had failed. Jason had failed. She had handled those stones in the beginning, mapped the basic energy circuits. She had believed in this plan more than anyone. The realization hit her so hard she could hardly breathe. A pebble skittered from Ron's boot and clattered to the base of the foundation, its sharp sound startling in the hush. His voice, when it came, was thick with disappointment. "It failed?" Sirius exhaled a long, wordless sigh and patted Harry's shoulder. He seemed to want to say something comforting, but no words came. "Take off! Take off!" Just as Snape was about to turn and leave, just as everyone assumed the grand ceremony would end with a spectacular light show and a collective sigh, when the air had begun to grow stagnant and awkward, an almost imperceptible rustling reached their ears. It was a tiny sound, like fine sand in an hourglass, or like something cracking deep underground. Every movement froze, every gaze swung toward its source. Along the razor-sharp rim where the floating city's foundation met the ground, dust and loose pebbles were slipping down. They weren't being blown by wind. They seemed to be peeling away from the structure itself, tugged off by an invisible force. Immediately after, a dull tremor rose from the earth. A low, continuous resonance traveled through the ground to their feet, making the soles of their shoes vibrate. A faint, clean scent, like thunder after rain, crept into the air. Then, before everyone's wide eyes and with all the wizards holding their breath, that massive object, the foundation 500 meters across and over 10 meters tall, built of countless boulders like a fortress of stone, truly moved. The hair-thin gap between it and the earth widened to the breadth of a finger. A stubborn clover growing at the edge had its roots severed in an instant. When the leaves detached from the soil, they trembled and fell. This man-made mountain, with a slowness almost imperceptible, and yet with an unshakable certainty, broke free from the planet's grip that had held it for eons. 1 meter, 2 meters, 5 meters, 10 meters. As the colossal shadow swept over the people below, the morning sun was blotted out and the world fell into a cold dusk. Temperatures dropped and a crushing sense of oppression poured down from above, filling their chests like a tangible tide. They looked up at the slowly ascending prototype of the giant city as if it were an ancient titan roused from the dawn of creation, while they themselves were nothing more than tiny ants on the ground. Megalophobia gripped them. Snape froze. For the first time, his dark eyes betrayed an involuntary violent flinch. What rose before him was a total subversion of his understanding of magic. His proud system of knowledge was being ground to dust by this silently ascending miracle. This was not magic as he knew it. It was a law, an authority, a miracle beyond his comprehension. Part of him, the investor who had anticipated the spectacle, thrilled. Another part, the wizard who clung to his doctrines, trembled with fear. His face went pale. Dumbledore, watching, thought of the person in that cell. Perhaps the future would unfold as he had imagined. Harry, Ron, and Hermione, young wizards witnessing such a thing for the first time, were speechless. Hermione reflexively lifted her notebook, desperate to record this tectonic moment, but her quill scraped only chaotic ink marks across the page. Her mind raced, trying to analyze it with runology, arithmancy, and ancient sigils, but every explanation hit an invisible wall. It felt as if she stood at the entrance to an endless library and could not even read the title of the first book. Ron stumbled backward, tripped on a protruding stone, and landed on his backside, yet he still stared up, mouth agape, emitting nothing but a stunned, Harry, Hogwarts' youngest, felt an absurd impulse, a raw instinct to mount his broom and circle this enormous, slowly rising golden snitch. Atop the foundation, Jason's figure grew smaller as the structure lifted. His arms, which had been held out level, sagged slightly. The floating city's base, like a wound torn from the earth by a divine hand, continued to rise. It passed over the highest canopies of the forbidden forest, reducing ancient trees to the size of potted bonsai beneath it. Before long, it rose above the tallest astronomy tower of Hogwarts Castle. This colossal black entity, defying fundamental laws of physics, cast a traveling solar eclipse over the morning. Its vast shadow swept slowly across spires, courtyards, and the Quidditch pitch. In the Ravenclaw common room, a seventh-year girl bent over advanced rune analysis. The light outside dimmed without warning. At first she thought it was a cloud, but the shadow's edge was too sharp, knife cut. She looked up, and the book in her hands fell with a dull thud onto the carpet. "What is that?" Her scream ripped through the castle's morning calm like a bomb into a still lake. In an instant, Hogwarts sprang to life. Heads popped out of windows across the houses, the courtyards filled with sleepy, disheveled students. All of them stared upward, mouths open, at the massive black square climbing steadily toward the higher sky. It made not a sound, but the pressure it radiated was enough to make one's soul shiver. "It's the Dark Mark. Lord Voldemort is back," a frightened Hufflepuff first-year cried, dropping to the ground in tears. "Don't be ridiculous. The shape is wrong." An older Gryffindor tried to argue, but his voice trembled. The square was simply beyond comprehension. It exceeded all limits of imagination. Deep within the castle's ancient stone, protective magic shivered at this foreign power. Portraits began whispering among themselves. Suitors of armor creaked uneasily. Professor McGonagall's office door slammed open, and she was a blur as she rushed into the corridor, her face harder than ever. "Flitwick, activate the Level 2 defense array. Sprout, protect the greenhouses and evacuate the students," she ordered, voice calm and decisive. "All prefects, immediately organize students to return to their common rooms. This is not a drill." Professor Flitwick, standing on a stack of books in his classroom, leaned out of the window. He waved his wand and beams of light shot toward key points around the castle. A nearly invisible protective shield rippled to life around Hogwarts, humming low and steady as it took shape. 115, Scar in the Sky, Eclipse at Hogwarts. Panic spread through Hogwarts like wildfire. In the Ravenclaw common room, the initial fear quickly turned into an academic frenzy. One student grabbed quill and parchment and tried to calculate the object's altitude and speed with trigonometry, but his hand shook so badly he couldn't draw a straight line. Another flipped frantically through wonders of ancient magic, muttering, "No, this isn't right. Not even the Hanging Gardens of Babylon were like this. It doesn't fit any known alchemical pattern." At the Hufflepuff entrance, older students tried to soothe the younger ones. "Don't be scared. Don't be scared. The professors will deal with it." A girl hugged a trembling first year, though her own eyes were fixed on the sky with worry, more afraid that whatever it was might fall and smash their beloved herbology greenhouses. Down in the Slytherin dungeon, the mood was different. Draco Malfoy stood before the huge glass window that looked out into the Black Lake. The water beyond was stained ink-black by the shadow above. His face was ashen, not with fear, but with a tangled mix of jealousy, shock, and humiliation. "Who did this?" he muttered, nails digging into his palms. This wasn't the elegant, commanding dark arts his father had bragged about. It was something unreasonable, inventive, almost godlike. In its presence, his proud, pure-blood name and family wealth felt suddenly small and ridiculous. Just as the castle's defensive enchantments were beginning to seal Hogwarts off from the outside world, an enormously loud voice, loud enough to rattle window panes, boomed across the courtyards and hillsides. "Don't panic! Don't panic! It's not a bad thing." All heads turned. Hagrid stood in his hut doorway, one hand waving his pink umbrella like a conductor's baton, the other pointing at the black behemoth in the sky. With his usual booming voice, magically amplified, he shouted toward the castle. "That's Jason Lester's. One of his contraptions. It's safe. Headmaster Dumbledore knows about it." Hagrid's announcement poured cold water on the panic. The fear subsided, but curiosity, astonishment and disbelief spiked to a new high. The students exchanged looks that were pure wonder. Jason Lester, the wizard who had shaken up the magical world, he'd made that thing? An invention? It looked like a scene from the myths. On a tower, Professor McGonagall paused, frowning. She snapped off a spell, and a silver cat sprang from the tip of her wand, streaking toward the forbidden forest like a bolt. She needed Dumbledore's confirmation. She knew a permit had been granted to the young wizard. She had not expected it to cause such a commotion. In the crowd, Percy Weasley, newly a prefect, flushed and hurriedly scribbled into his notebook. Unauthorized ascent experiment of an oversized alchemical construct in Hogwarts airspace. Serious violation of Article 37 of the International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy. Many students who had only that morning boarded the Hogwarts Express and waved goodbye from the station had watched the scene from the train windows. "Stop the train! Stop the train! I want to go back!" Someone yelled, throwing open a window. The Hogwarts Express whistled and rolled on, its wheels clattering over the rails. The castle's silhouette slid away into the morning mist, but far above, the enormous black square, like a scar on the sky, held everyone's gaze. In the compartment, Harry, Ron, and Hermione pressed at the windows until the dark shape merged with the clouds. Then they slumped back onto the plush seats. "I still feel like I'm dreaming," Ron said, collapsing. He popped a Bertie Bott's every flavor bean in his mouth, chewed twice, and spat it out. "Ugh! Earwax!" Merlin's beard. "Jason, did that thing actually fly up there?" He looked at Jason, who sat diagonally across, his face fixed in something close to stunned. Ron thought of the burrow, of houses held together by magic and love, and of his friend, who had, without telling them, lifted a piece of earth and hurled it into the sky. The comparison made his head spin. Hermione's notebook lay open on her lap, packed with questions and sketches, but she had no idea where to begin. "Jason, can those runes keep absorbing material and turning it into magic? It's not a perpetual motion machine, is it?" Jason leaned back and fiddled with a cool metal charm in his pocket. The charm flowed and reshaped in his fingers, forming a miniature nebula one moment and a complex geometric lattice the next, like living liquid metal. "Perpetual motion doesn't exist, Hermione," he said. "Its core energy comes from extracting and converting certain spatial dimensions. Think of it as opening a tap to an alternate dimension." Hermione's eyes blazed with curiosity. "And the runes?" "Part of the Arcane system," Jason replied. "If modern magic is about learning to use tools, Arcane magic is about trying to understand, or even rewrite, the rules that make those tools work. Gamp's law doesn't apply to it. Once you know the basics, I'll teach you the advanced runes, and you'll see." "Rewrite the rules?" Hermione breathed. Her fingers tightened around her quill. Summer suddenly seemed full of limitless possibilities. "Like the legends of Atlantis?" "You could say that." Jason stopped fidgeting and met her gaze. Harry wasn't thinking about scenery or showing off. The sight made his chest tighten with old memories, the Dursleys, the cupboard under the stairs, and with darker thoughts too. Lord Voldemort, the nightmare that might one day return. 116. Dimensionality strike. The top student's summer vacation plan shocked the entire Arcane. The power his friend displayed wasn't for destruction or slaughter, it was for creation and protection, an absolute, indestructible force capable of isolating any malice. If Jason's parents were still alive, would they live in a place like that? "So what are you doing this summer? Building a real castle up there?" Harry asked, curious. Jason's gaze drifted to the fleeting landscape outside the window. "Two things," he said. "First, finish the preliminary stealth for the floating city. Make it vanish from this world. Second, prepare for my promotion to second-order arcanist." The air in the compartment seemed to freeze. Ron's chocolate frog slipped from his hand and fell to the floor. He barely noticed. Harry stared, feeling his brain buckle under the information. Hermione's quill tip poked a tiny hole through her notebook. "Stealth? Something that big," she breathed. "Making a 500-meter floating city invisible on every level, the energy and computational demands are unimaginable. I thought that sort of design was fantasy. And a second-order arcanist? What does that even mean?" "Literally, unseen, untouchable, undetectable," Jason replied. He pulled his attention from the window and met their faces. And second-order arcanist means having a far deeper grasp of magic's essence and the rules of the world. A cascade of silent calculations ran through his mind, a torrent of light points and lines far vaster than all the books in the Hogwarts library. Soul Puppet Zero's voice chimed in internally. Soul Puppet Zero, the preliminary stealth array, void veil structure, has been fully deduced. 18,672 core rune nodes and 93,360 auxiliary energy circuits. Material list. A generated 300 kilograms of thorium mithril alloy, 50 pounds of stardust sand, 21 void crystals. Jason's mind scanned the list. Materials were manageable. The funds Sirius and Snape had advanced plus income from meditation would just about cover it. Then the next line hit him. Estimated peak energy consumption, 7,000 standard magic units per hour. He frowned. That consumption was terrifying. It would burn through galleons. He'd have to construct the supporting elemental pool soon, or the floating city would be nothing but a one-time luxury. So, Ron finally found his voice, scooping the fallen chocolate frog up and wiping it with reverent care. He looked at Jason as if he were staring at something impossible. Other people's summer homework is a few essays. Your summer homework is to make a mountain disappear and then level up? This is a bit over the top, Harry agreed, staring at the boy who attended classes with them and shared meals, who now seemed wrapped in an impenetrable aura. Can you really do all that on your own? Most of the basic work can be handled by my rock elementals, Jason said. But the core rune engraving and debugging have to be done by me. He added, almost casually, I have some special helpers, too. The Soul Puppet Zero in his pocket vibrated faintly, as if acknowledging him. Then it projected another dry assessment into his thoughts. Soul Puppet Zero. Based on current material reserves and array complexity, Void Veil completion estimated at 73.4%. For complete stealth, Material List B must be supplemented, or the core rune structure must be optimized. The latter requires elevating deduction capability to astrolabe level, estimated 72 hours of uninterrupted computation. Jason exhaled inwardly. The computing power contained in Voldemort's remnant soul was monstrous, but this array's demands were equally extreme. An astrolabe-level computation with his current first-order arcanist capacity was like asking a child to solve the Goldbach conjecture. Trying it would only fry his brain. Promotion to second-order arcanist was a hard prerequisite and seemed unavoidable. If only there were a meditation room, promotion would be a straightforward, safe process. But this was still a low-magic world. It wouldn't meet the requirements easily. Hermione hesitated, then spoke. I might not grasp the arcane theories yet, but if you need help, looking things up, organizing data, or doing basic rune circuit deductions, I'll help. Thank you, Hermione. Jason's face softened. He felt her sincerity. If there's anywhere I can use help, I'll ask. But for the core theory, it's too soon. Ron leaned closer, eyes shining. Then can we visit your floating city this summer? The view must be incredible. When it's completely hidden, I'll consider setting up a secure teleportation point, Jason said, non-committal. The train rattled on and began to slow. London's outskirts slid past the windows. The compartment door opened, and the trolley witch poked her head in, smiling brightly. Anything for you? Chocolate frogs? Bertie Bott's every flavor beans. No one answered. The three friends were still reeling from the idea of a disappearing mountain and the godlike power behind it. The witch smiled awkwardly and closed the door. The train pulled into King's Cross with a long, sharp hiss. Platform 9th Horse lay ahead, a burst of familiar chaos, owls hooting, parents shouting, luggage wheels rumbling, a symphony of the magical world coming home. Ron woke from his vision of the floating city's self-service restaurant as the carriage jolted. Hurry, Ron. Your mum will be frantic. Hermione tugged her luggage down with practiced ease, notebook clutched to her chest like a secret grimoire. Harry lingered just a moment longer to watch Jason, who was calmly packing his modest suitcase as if the gigantic flying structure he'd been talking about were no more impressive than a paper airplane. The contrast made Harry's head swim. Jason, you're really not coming out to play this summer? There's a Quidditch pitch near my house. Ron made one last plea. Maybe, after I sort out a few things, Jason replied, shrugging. They squeezed out of the carriage, and were immediately swept into Mrs. Weasley's arms. Like an affectionate lioness, she barreled through the crowd and enveloped Ron, Harry, and Hermione in a hug so strong it felt like it could break ribs. One heard 17th. "Fudge is bait!" Mrs. Weasley kept muttering as she fussed over the students. "Oh, my darlings, you all look so thin. Has the school food gotten worse again? Harry, dear, your robes are a whole section too short." After her enthusiastic hugs, her eyes fell on Jason, and her eagerness took on something like reverence. Mr. Weasley, standing nearby, looked delightfully proper. He patted his children's shoulders, then leaned forward toward Jason and whispered, curious as ever, "Jason, I heard Muggles have something called a plug. How exactly does it send electricity into that box called a television?" Fred and George squeezed in from the other side, their faces shining as if they'd just found a pocket full of galleons. "Jason, our partner," Fred threw an arm around his shoulder. "We've decided Weasley's Joke Shop Floating City flagship store. It will be in the best spot in Diagon Alley." "That's right," George added. "And the slogan, the only shop that will make you laugh to the sky. Brilliant, isn't it?" "You two," Percy Weasley snapped. He pushed up his brand-new prefect glasses and approached with an expression of grave disapproval. "Jason, I must remind you that, under the supplementary clause of the decree for the reasonable restriction of underage sorcery and Article 37 of the International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy, any act that could massively expose the existence of magic must be reported to and approved by the Ministry. What you did this time was most definitely out of line." Before Jason could explain the directional flow of charge or respond to the business proposal, a gentle voice interrupted. "Arthur, I'm afraid we won't have time today to unravel the mystery of the plug, but I do have some new thoughts on the uses of rubber ducks." Albus Dumbledore had appeared at Mr. Weasley's elbow, cradling a gaudily bound copy of Witch Weekly as if he were merely admiring the latest knitting patterns. His arrival quieted the immediate hubbub. Mr. Weasley's eyes lit up, and he was instantly drawn into conversation. Dumbledore chatted amiably, but his gaze slid over Jason's shoulder, and he, with the magazine, made the faintest of gestures toward a quieter corner piled with luggage trolleys. It was subtle, an old headmaster's way of summoning a student to his office. Jason understood immediately. "Mrs. Weasley, Mr. Weasley, I have something I must attend to." "Excuse me," Dumbledore said lightly. Jason politely accepted Mrs. Weasley's renewed insistence that he should stay for a meal, slipped free, and threaded his way to the corner. Dumbledore was already waiting there. He closed the magazine, and the eyes behind his half-moon spectacles seemed to look right through him. The noise of the platform shrank until it sounded distant and muffled. "A rather remarkable end-of-term firework display, Jason," Dumbledore said softly, though an unspoken pressure lay under his words. "The stone you threw into the sky, the splash it made, was larger than you probably imagine." "Just some basic construction, Headmaster, for a safer summer research environment," Jason replied, the answer airtight, though his mind raced. Dumbledore tapped the cover of Witch Weekly against his palm. The sound was unnaturally clear in the enchanted enclave. "The Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes lines have been ringing off the hook. The Muggle Relations Office has logged over 30 reports of a localized solar eclipse appearing over Scotland. The Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures sent people to look for whether a Norwegian ridgeback had nested in the area. The Centaurs even sent a messenger to ask if the sky had been torn." He paused, amusement threading his tone. "It took some persuasion on my part to call this a rare, large-scale weather magic experimental accident and calm things for the moment. And Minister Fudge, he's not the most subtle man, but he has a remarkable nose for anything that might make the front page of the Prophet." Jason felt his chest tighten. He had expected the ministry to notice, but not to have every office and every front-page hungry official alerted at once. Dumbledore's next sentence was as plain as it was grave. "The International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy is a dam, Jason. And what you've created is a tsunami," Dumbledore continued. "It will attract unnecessary prying, both from within and beyond our ranks." "I understand, Headmaster," Jason said. "Concealment measures are already underway. It will disappear entirely soon. I've set up a teleportation array. When I return, I'll make it descend." A cold flicker of thought slid through his mind. Feedback from Soul Puppet Zero. An image as sharp as it was clinical. A gloomy tribunal. Fudge's flushed face accusing. A sea of wands and flashing magnesium lights. And a chilling mandate. Within 1 month it must be hidden, or the entire magical world will consider it a threat. Optimal solution: within 15 days, complete the second-order promotion. Tear apart the mental barrier and reshape the source of your magic. Disappear is a good word, Dumbledore said after a moment, watching him and seeming satisfied. I trust you'll manage it. Have a pleasant summer, Jason. And remember, sometimes the greatest strength lies in knowing when to hide yourself. With that, the old headmaster turned and melted back into the crowd. His purple robes flashed, and, as if by the casual closing of a conversation, he was gone around the corner. Jason stood alone, his fingers closing unconsciously around the cold surface of Soul Puppet Zero. It pulsed under his palm and transmitted another vision, this one of failure. His mental world as a shattered mirror, countless versions of himself screaming silently as a torrent of arcane energy washed and tore his consciousness until it became nothing but a thoughtless, instinct-driven mass, a prisoner for all eternity. His summer homework had just jumped from difficult to impossible. Not only did he have to make that 500-meter-square structure vanish entirely, he now had to complete a life-or-death second-order promotion within half a month. He took a steadying breath and pushed the panic down. One last look, Harry, Ron, and Hermione, still laughing with their parents across the platform. Then he turned toward the archway that divided the magical and muggle worlds. As he passed through, he brushed by a hurried muggle with a briefcase. The man didn't so much as glance at him. Jason walked on, mind already compiling lists, measures to conceal, a teleportation array to refine, a promotion to force through, each task stacking into the long, hard summer ahead. 118. Bottleneck or world limit? Passing through the archway that marked the boundary between the Muggle world and the magic world, the hustle and bustle of King's Cross Station fell away. Jason's figure soon disappeared into the crowded streets of London, and he headed straight back to the familiar orphanage. Night had come, the house was quiet. He moved skillfully to avoid drawing attention and returned to his smallest room. The entrance beneath his bed was still hidden, but when he slipped through it, the scene downstairs was nothing like the simple earthen cellar it had once been. After continuous expansion and renovation by the remotely operated Stone One and subsequent arcane puppets, the underground base had grown into a considerable secret stronghold. The air was dry and clean, having passed through filtration and circulation systems. The walls were reinforced and inscribed with stabilizing runes that gave off a faint magical glow. Most striking was a newly appeared, ancient-looking stone platform at the center of the base, carved with complex patterns. Thick, crystal-like guide wires ran from one end of the platform deep into the foundations, where a hidden one-way teleportation anchor had established an initial energy and data link to the foundation of the floating city high above. Jason went to the stone platform, his temporary control center. He spread his palm and the arcane codex appeared silently, its pages flipping open and casting a deep blue light over his young, composed face. Arcane Codex. Name: Jason Lester. First Order Arcanist. Peak. Mental Power: 95/99. Bottleneck. Physique: 35. Magic Power: 980/990. Bottleneck. Arcane Servant. Stone Elemental Servant. Optimized. Soul Puppet 0. Core Auxiliary AI. Mastered Spells: Fossil to Mud, Mud to Stone, Arcane Vision, Lightning Spells, Arcane Missiles, Basic Rune Engraving, First Order Puppet Construction. Special Abilities: Memory Palace, Grand Sun Codex, First Order, Arcane Affinity, High. His mental power read 95 points, just 4 points short of the First Order cap of 99 shown in the Codex. He could feel it. In recent days, no matter how long or how deeply he meditated, mental power growth had slowed to a crawl. His magic power limit was constrained by his mental power and had nearly stagnated. It's hit its limit, Jason murmured. Soul Puppet 0 answered in his mind with cold precision. Based on meditation data over the past 72 hours, mental power acquisition efficiency has decreased by 97.3%. Magic power natural recovery speed and upper limit growth have approached 0. Conclusion: First Order barrier has been reached. He turned to the chapter on rank advancement. New text unfurled slowly in the Arcane Codex, carrying an ancient, immense aura. Second-order Arcanist promotion conditions. 1. Mental power reaches the first-order limit, 99 points, and magic power is full. 2. Construct a high-tier energy-gathering and soul-shaping array. Draw upon the ambient arcane energies between heaven and earth. Condense and purify them to provide the foundation for soul transformation. 3. Endure the baptism of the arcane elemental tide. Use the array's power to forcibly guide a high concentration of elemental energy into oneself, cleansing the soul and tempering the spirit. This process is extremely dangerous. A slight error can cause the soul to scatter. 4. Condense the prototype of the arcane heart. Under the baptism and pressure of the elemental tide, combine one's spirit core with highly condensed arcane magic power to form an initial, stable magic source and casting core, the arcane heart. It read like a milestone on the Arcanist's path to transcendence, a watershed between mortals and something greater. Every phrase felt heavy, making it hard to breathe, especially the terms arcane elemental tide and scattering of the soul. They hinted at the bottleneck of this world. Soul Puppet 0, begin parsing the structure of the energy-gathering and soul-shaping array, Jason ordered. Command received. Beginning parsing of energy-gathering and soul-shaping array. Soul Puppet Zero's cold voice filled his mind. The countless runes and energy circuit diagrams in the Codex unfolded into three-dimensional form and were disassembled and analyzed by Zero's powerful computation. Preliminary analysis results. This array requires at least 36 types of rare magical materials as nodes, 108 core runes in series, and at least 3,600 auxiliary runes forming the energy circuits. Its complexity far exceeds all currently known first-order arrays. Risk assessment, array construction failure rate, insufficient material purity, rune engraving errors, 45%. Elemental tide out of control probability, guidance error, insufficient mental power to control, 70%. Arcane heart condensation failure probability, insufficient soul strength, energy backlash, 60%. Estimated overall promotion success rate, below 5%. The cold numbers made Jason's chest tighten. A success rate below 5% was almost a sentence to death. Dumbledore had warned him to hide his power. The Ministry of Magic was watching him, and now he faced a yawning chasm to promotion. Minister Fudge's bloated face and the flashbulbs on the judgment bench, Jason muttered, thinking of the grim future Soul Puppet Zero had once predicted. I must reach second order within 15 days, and then hide the floating city completely. Time was his enemy. Searching for alternative solutions, found relevant fragments regarding soul strengthening and energy manipulation in Lord Voldemort's remnant soul memory fragments. Soul Puppet Zero's voice returned. Fragment content summary. Dark arts soul-splitting ritual. High risk, irreversible, significant side effects, excluded. An ancient dark arts method of strengthening soul resilience by sacrificing pure life force, incompatible with the arcane system, excluded. Scattered insights on the interaction between the soul and external energy. One fragment describes stress-induced transformation the soul might undergo for self-preservation under extreme pressure, mentioning a concept of death to rebirth, which bears some similarity to the arcane elemental tide baptism, but lacks systematic theory and safety measures. Jason frowned. Voldemort's dark arts paths were clearly unsuitable for him, but those scattered insights, especially about the soul's reactions under extreme pressure, might offer indirect ideas. Organize those fragments and cross-reference them with the data on the energy-gathering and soul-shaping array and the arcane elemental tide. Look for any commonalities or risk avoidance methods we can adapt. Command executed. Beginning comparative analysis. Estimated time, 17 hours, 35 minutes. Jason took a slow breath. The path of arcane advancement was layered with unknowns and dangers at every step. What exactly was an arcane heart? How did it differ from a traditional wizard's magic core? And what sort of terrifying baptism would the elemental tide force upon him? 119. Every time you put pen to paper is a gamble. 17 hours later, Soul Puppet Zero's analysis stopped as abruptly as if someone had pulled the plug. Lord Voldemort's warped methods of soul enhancement were a shortcut into the abyss, fundamentally incompatible with the arcane system's austere star-like logic. The only unanimous conclusion the machine reached could be summed up in four cold words: place them in a deadly situation. No shortcuts. Jason opened his eyes slowly. The memory of Minister Fudge's flushed face and the flashing lights on the judgment seat slipped away like fog. 15 days, Soul Puppet Zero's deadline. Either he would completely conceal the floating city, or he would become a manifest danger to the entire magical world, nailed to the Temple of Infamy in history. This was no ordinary upgrade. It was a high-stakes gamble with everything he owned. He stood and walked to the deepest storage vault of the underground base. The heavy stone door slid open soundlessly, and a thick, potent magical aura spilled out, sticky in the way of rare essences. Here lay the fruit of 2 years of work, every chip he had put on the table for this one roll of the dice. Rare potion ingredients traded from Snape's private collection, odd little power-giving gifts from Dumbledore, and the vast pile of galleons from selling 2 versions of the meditation that would make any pureblood clutch their pearls. All of it was sealed now into gleaming vials and crystals arrayed before him. He had simulated the attributes, purity, and energy activity of each material thousands of times in his mind. He crossed the vault to the empty core of the base, the arcane-reinforced, obsidian-smooth floor that would be both altar and execution ground. 0. Activate high-precision auxiliary engraving mode. Mode confirmed. Array structure loaded. Real-time error monitoring initiated. Jason inhaled slowly and closed his eyes. He brought the Grandson Codex online and tuned the roiling magic and spirit within him to near-perfect equilibrium. The world narrowed until the only sound was his heartbeat and the flow of blood. Then he opened his eyes, pupils empty of emotion. A pure arcane gleam condensed at his fingertip, crystalline and alive. He leaned down and let that light kiss the cold ground, etching the first energy pattern finer than a spider's thread. It was an extreme strain on both spirit and magic. All of the designs were fixed in his memory palace, 36 rare materials as core nodes, 108 main runes forming the array's skeleton, and 3,600 auxiliary runes spreading like veins. The spirit gathering and shaping array was so complex that the most ancient patterns in the Hogwarts stacks looked like child's doodles by comparison. Time stretched until each second felt like a century. Sweat beaded on his forehead and ran down his cheeks. He didn't notice. The muscles in his arm twitched from the sustained, high-precision output, but he shoved the tremor down with sheer will and spiritual focus. Warning: Core Node Number 1, Wind's Eye Stone. Energy pattern deviated by 0.03 millimeters. Soul Puppet Zero's voice cut into his mind like a scalpel. Jason flicked his wrist. The light blade at his fingertip rotated like a surgical tool and brushed an invisible trajectory, correcting the infinitesimal misalignment. There was a faint sizzle and then a pop. Because of that split-second adjustment, a secondary energy circuit suffered a 1/10,000th of a second delay in its infusion rhythm and burned out. A charred scar marked the floor, the air filled with the sting of ozone. Engraving error. Consequence: secondary circuit damaged. If this had occurred in the main circuit, your right arm would no longer exist. The machine's voice was clinical and merciless. Jason reached into his storage and brought out a fist-sized dark red crystal that seemed to hold a thunderstorm within. Dragon blood crystal. Mere contact sent a scorching, violent pulse up his arm, as if a silent, furious dragon tried to consume his will. He forced it into the 7th node. Instantly, the array hummed like a living thing, infused with frantic vitality. Correction complete. Conductive silver line magic flow overloaded by 3%. Adjust immediately. Jason lowered his overall output slightly. The silver circuits, agitated by the dragon blood impact, calmed and rerouted. He and Soul Puppet Zero operated like a single, precise organism, man and supercomputer dancing on a knife edge. One by one, the rare materials were seeded with surgical care. Soft lights rose, fierce lights flared, deep wells of magic pulsed. Together, they braided into a vast star map on the floor, mysterious and beautiful. The glow swelled until the underground base felt like a small temple of divinity. When he reached for the last main component, the star iron matrix, a slab that seemed to contain a sliver of night sky flecked with flowing starlight, fatigue rolled up from some deep place inside him. Soul Puppet Zero sounded again, and this time its voice carried weight as though even a machine felt the pressure of what came next. Warning: third main node, star iron matrix, is about to form a core resonance triangle with seventh node, dragon blood crystal, and 12th node, tear of the storm. This is the final and most unstable energy balance structure of the array. If initial energy frequency synchronization fails, resonance will instantly diverge. A chain reaction detonation will occur within 0.3 seconds. His hand hovered above the star iron matrix. Its faint, cold glow painted his face ashen. He could feel the almost complete array underfoot like a sleeping beast, hungry, breathing, waiting for its heart. Soul Puppet Zero's words were mercilessly precise, each one a verdict. Power assessment will trigger a localized reality collapse event. The energy release will not be a conventional explosion, but will instantly deconstruct all matter within a 50-meter radius, including the orphanage on the surface and all its occupants, down to the atomic level. No traces will be left, the machine added, then fell into a pause as if simulating some human inflection. Only absolute nothingness will remain. 120. The elements roar at midnight. As the star iron matrix finally settled, Jason's fingertips pressed it into the last groove of the magic array. Click, a soft sound, like the first star in a newborn universe finding its place. Dead silence. Inside the underground base, the air seemed to solidify. 1/10 of a millisecond later, a hum rose from the earth, a deep resonance full of potential. The light did not erupt all at once, but spread like ink on rice paper, beginning at 36 core nodes and flowing along 3,600 auxiliary lines. An eerie blue arcane glow crawled across the floor. The air thickened. Each breath felt as if he were inhaling fine metallic dust. A gentle static prickled his skin and made his hair lift. The star iron matrix had awakened. Its wildness, fused with the dragon blood crystal's ferocity and the storm tear's swiftness, formed a precarious, triangular balance. The entire array began to breathe. Soul Puppet Zero's voice echoed in his mind, flat and formal, activating free arcane energy concentration rising rapidly. Jason sat cross-legged at the center of the array, eyes shut tight. Above ground, the orphanage slept in the hush of a London midnight. No one knew that dozens of meters beneath their feet, the world around them was being remade. Boom! Energy roared to life on a spiritual level. Within several hundred meters, free elements were stirred as if by an invisible giant hand, turning into a torrent that penetrated earth and rock and poured itself, greedy and raw, into the matrix. The air inside the base began to twist. Light refracted into grotesque colors, and shadows on the walls writhed like living things. Warning: elemental tide intensity exceeds design limit by 15%. Energy overflow detected at the edge of the magic array. The voice of Soul Puppet Zero suddenly carried a thin electromagnetic crackle, as if its signal were being interfered with. The violent elemental tide crashed over him like a flood of mud and stone, submerging his body and pouring into his soul. He couldn't make a sound, his lungs filled with high-pressure energy, and his chest felt crushed inward. It wasn't only pain. His soul was like a sheet of wet paper, repeatedly pricked, torn, and ground to pulp by countless scorching needles of power. His spirit was hurled into a volcanic furnace, every inch being scalded and vaporized. He could almost smell his own mental power burning. The memory palace convulsed. Spiderweb cracks spidered across halls that represented rune knowledge and spell models. A statue symbolizing fossil to mud collapsed and dusted away. Bookshelves that held first-order knowledge ignited. Pages went up in ash as if wailing. He had to hold on. He roared inside his head and forced the Grand Sun Codex into action. An illusory golden sun rose at the center of his spirit, a faint but resolute light. A lighthouse in a storm, trying to carve a pure space inside the elemental maelstrom. Wizards follow their bloodlines. Arcanists plunder the world's power and reshape their bodies into something transcendent. Warning: vital signs extremely unstable. Heart rate 220. Mental power fluctuations exceed threshold. Magic circuit area collapsing. Soul Puppet Zero's data stream stuttered as if something struck its logical core. Now, reshape. Jason's consciousness was a small boat on a raging river, but it fixed on a single course. He abandoned the futile defense of the old magic circuits in his body and let the violent energy smash them into fragments. Those familiar channels that had felt like extensions of his arms became countless burning shards. He reached into the destructive storm with his mind as if it were his hands. Every contact sent agony through him like his soul being ripped. He seized a glowing shard of circuit and pressed it toward a pool of liquefied arcane energy. They repelled each other like poles of a magnet. He forced them together. Each adjustment scorched like reshaping bone with a red-hot iron. At last, the first brand-new circuit lit, a solid silver-blue thread, condensed and heavy. Violent, compressed power surged along it. Even a trace of that power made him taste a new kind of strength. He felt the magic itself change. First-order magic had been a stream. Now it was being compressed, purified into something like liquid mercury. Dumbledore's magic capacity might have been second order, still a river made from streams. What Jason was cultivating was something else entirely, the core of a star, the arcane heart. At the center of his spirit, beneath the golden sun, a point of light, weaker than a star but purer than a diamond, strained to condense under crushing pressure. Each pulse made the new circuits resonate. This would be the source of his future power. It needed more heat. It needed to sprout, to remold all the shattered circuits. Warning: main nodes 7, 13, and 21 have reached peak energy output. Cracks have appeared in the outer protective wall. At the array's edge, the runes etched into the ground flickered and sizzled, smelling of ozone. Strands of near-liquid elemental energy, like wild, runaway horses, leaked from the fissures and struck the base walls, sending showers of rubble skittering. The underground facility trembled. The fine dust from above sifted down in a hush. The real vibration triggered an involuntary vision. Mrs. Martha putting away the biscuits he'd forgotten on the windowsill, tucking them into a tin, and muttering that he was too thin. He had expected the advancement to be difficult, but he hadn't expected the elemental tide to exceed every margin of safety. If only he'd had an elemental pool from a floating city, none of this would be happening. For now, the premise was to survive. Warning: core resonance triangle imbalanced. Reality deconstruction initiated from node 7. In 30 seconds, the magic array will completely collapse. Soul Puppet Zero's warning cut off abruptly and was replaced by a harsh static laced with a fear that didn't belong to a machine. It was a tremor from the deepest part of a soul, the terror faced when confronting a natural enemy, pure, irresistible annihilation. If the array collapsed, the unrestrained energy would obliterate this place, and the orphanage above it. He would be scattered. The nascent arcane heart fluttered under the pressure, sounding like a real heart. Each beat a struggle, yet stubbornly firm. Just a little longer, and it might take shape. Jason opened his eyes. The pupils reflected the eerie blue violence of the magic. He stared at the rune node that had already developed spiderweb cracks and forced himself to keep breathing.